All right, we have another Binger boneheaded moment. This is going to be a long list. It didn't look too intimidating until the trial began, but every day brings all new material for this list, so it's going to get lengthy. In this case here, we have the whole DNA brouhaha. Thomas Clair Binger has decided that DNA analysis really holds the key to unlocking the mysteries of the Kenosha shootings. Boy, once the jury hears this DNA testimony, they're going to be all for hanging Kyle Rittenhouse. Or at least that was Thomas Clair Binger's hope. And unfortunately, he screwed up. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnnie Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnnie Walker Dread Show.
Police officer Jeffrey Van Wee. He's from the Kenosha Police Department. And he is going to single-handedly just gut Thomas Clair Binger's entire strategy towards this DNA. Actually, I shouldn't say single-handedly. He has also the state forensic scientist who's going to come in here and basically drive over the remains. But at any rate, let's listen in on Jeffrey Van Wee's testimony.
Officer, how are you employed?
The City of Kenosha Police Department.
How long have you been a police officer?
For 18 years.
Did you become involved in the investigation of a shooting involving a Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
And how did you become involved in that case?
I was handed over evidence by Detectives Howard and Antoranium to process and actually secure into evidence.
Antoranium. Gee, that name seems to pop up a lot. And you know why? There's a bunch of them, and they're all related. And they're basically running the show here as far as the prosecution goes. Of course, they're not doing any better than Binger, but that's beside the point.
And how did you go about obtaining that or starting doing that?
So Detectives Howard and Antoranium met me by the police station. From there, the evidence was brought into our evidence room in the police station, and it was turned over to me.
And was this on August 26th?
Yes.
Do you recall the time?
It was roughly 9 in the morning, maybe a little before 9 in the morning.
And do you know from where these items had come?
No.
So what is the very first thing you did?
First thing I did was I was given 2 rifle boxes, so I actually processed the rifles and took photos of them.
Now, do you have any special training to do this type of thing?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
I'm a certified evidence technician for the last 15 years.
And
so he's experienced. That's not his problem. The problem that he has was he was never told to do the right things. We'll see.
what does that mean?
That means that as far as crime scenes go, that I would, whenever any different kind of crime scene goes, or I would go respond to that scene and I would process that scene for evidence, searching for whether it's DNA or fingerprint evidence or blood evidence. Also just processing evidence. So like if a detective has an item that he needs processed for DNA, then I would actually take it and swab that correctly.
And how do you swab that correctly?
As far as the rifles went, I actually took 3 swabs from each rifle. The swabs I obtained were from the trigger, from the pistol grip, and then from the barrel has a guard around the barrel, so I swabbed the guard of that barrel because that's the most likely place that somebody's holding that weapon, that their hand would be on that guard.
That's the most likely place a person would be holding that weapon if they're the owner. But the problem here is we all know who owns the rifle. There's no dispute about the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse is the one that was doing the shooting. What's in dispute is whether Joseph Rosenbaum got his hand on it. Now keep in mind, there's also the issue about Anthony Huber getting hold of the rifle. But we have a photograph of that. We can pretty well settle that. It's Joseph Rosenbaum. Did he get a hold of the barrel or not? Gee, we're not going to find out, are we? And you know why? Because they never tested the barrel. Let's listen in some more.
Why would you not, or why didn't you swab the actual barrel?
So when I was given these rifles to process, I was instructed to process them. There was at that time, for my knowledge, there was no reason to swab the barrel.
So you saw the areas where someone is most likely to actually grip or hold the weapon.
Correct.
And that generally would not be the barrel of a gun.
Correct.
You're gutting your own argument. What the hell are you doing up there? You're getting up in front of the microphone and you're asking the witness to basically kill your own strategy. You're emphasizing the fact that the barrel was not tested. Why on earth would you do that?
So what did you do? What's the first weapon that you encountered?
It was a rifle box that was written. It had writing on it. It said Kyle Rittenhouse.
So what did you do with that?
With that one, I opened the box up. I wound up taking the serial number down, the information down from the weapon, photographing it, and then swabbing it in those areas I just mentioned for DNA.
Did you take photos of them?
Yes, I did.
And then what is the next thing you did in processing this evidence?
That, once I finish with that, it gets secured up, and then so I tape up the box, and it's all.
All right, so you weren't here, obviously, but a couple days ago we had an evidence box that was opened and it was taken out of there. So you would have at first sealed it up in that box. You were the first one to do that?
That's correct.
And then you would put that into evidence?
Yes.
And then you would come back to the next thing?
Correct.
All right, so what's the next thing that you did?
Next was an additional rifle box, which was labeled Dominic on it.
And what did you do with that?
The same process. So I wound up swabbing the same areas on that weapon for DNA, photographing it, and then securing it, taping up and securing it.
So they took Dominique's rifle from him and swabbed it. Dominique is a legal owner of that rifle. I don't know. That sounds really funny.
Now, I'm going to go back to the box that had Kyle Rittenhouse written on it. Did you ever look into you said there was a rifle. Was there anything else along with the rifle?
There was also a sight or a scope, if you will, inside the box. It was not attached to the rifle.
Was there anything attached to the rifle?
A black sling.
And was there any ammunition or a magazine or anything like that?
Not in that box. There was a separate bag that had a magazine in there with live ammunition.
And did that have one or two magazines?
Had one.
And was there
As opposed to like duds?
any markings on that box or bag?
I was informed by the detectives that was from the rifle belonging to Kyle Rittenhouse.
So what did you find when you looked at that magazine?
The magazine had live ammunition in it.
Do you know how much live ammunition was in that magazine?
The magazine itself was a 30 capacity for 30 rounds, and there were 22 live bullets in there, unfired bullets.
And were they all the same brand or were they different brands?
They were all the same as far as the caliber goes, but there was multiple different brands inside.
And what was the caliber of these?
There were 223s.
And did you take a DNA swab of that piece of evidence as well?
I did a swab of the actual magazine, so I took a swab off each side of the magazine, a DNA swab.
One swab on both or one
swab on each side of the magazine.
And then did you package up the magazine and the
Right,
live
so
rounds?
I wound up taking each unfired projectile out, and then in the order they came in, I secured them in boxes. So like the first unfired bullet that I ejected out of the magazine, I would put in a box and label it 1, the second one 2. So I did that for all 22 rounds, and I took photos of each one.
Took photos of each one?
Correct.
Did you do the same thing with the rifle that was labeled Dominic?
There was no ammunition with that, no magazine.
But you did the same process in terms of the DNA swabbing?
I wonder why they're allowing the questioning about Dominique's rifle. Dominique's not on trial here. Is it relevant? Don't know.
The actual rifle, yes.
And then what do you do once you take these swabs?
So the swabs, I wound up securing. The swabs actually go in a little swab box, and I secure them in an envelope, something that can breathe, that's breathable, and then that gets taped up, and I secure those in a locker into evidence.
Was there any other evidence that was not related to these firearms that you packaged or logged that day?
There were a few other items I was handed. Yes, there was some clothing, there was a cell phone, and then a backpack which contained some medical supplies.
Did you do anything with the information that you got off of the firearms?
So we do with every firearm that we log into evidence. We have a form called an E-trace form, and what that is we work with, we log into evidence. ATF agent who actually did a quick.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Basically, he already tore apart his own argument. The defense really doesn't have to do much here. And in fact, the defense is probably crossing off questions on their own legal pads because they had them prepared, but this guy took care of it for them. I sometimes wonder if the prosecution isn't working for the defense here. So they put up an officer and basically got him to admit that he didn't swab that part of the rifle that's important. Now, the defense is going to jump all over this. By the way, you may be wondering, wait a minute, how is it that this is a Clair Binger boneheaded moment? Well, he's the manager, he's the lead prosecutor in this trial, and this is his strategy. Yeah, sure, this other attorney went up there and asked the questions, but that's not the issue here. This is Clair Binger's baby. He's the manager, and as they said in A Bug's Life, it's always his fault.
So on the 26th, you basically assist these two detectives, Howard and Antaramian, in terms of doing this swab. Is that right?
I did. They handed off the evidence to me, but I did the swabs by myself. Yes.
Understood. Well, and your report indicates that at KPD, evidence detective Antaramian advised he needed 2 rifles processed. Did he tell you, he being Detective Antaramian, the areas that he wanted swabbed by you?
He did not.
Who made that decision?
I did.
At that point, do you know anything about the case?
Not a whole lot, no.
Oh, man. The prosecution should have been prepared for this one. They basically handed the rifle to somebody who didn't even know what was going on and just told him to swab it. How's he supposed to know that the barrel is really the important part as far as the investigation goes? He swabbed it like he normally would to try to find out who was actually doing the shooting. But we already know that.
Okay, so you mentioned that the trigger is swabbed, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I know we don't have the pistol or the firearms here, so I'm gonna. When you say the barrel guard, is that the area here where my left hand would be if I was holding it like this?
Correct. So the barrel of the gun has a plastic, if you would, guard around it, and that's the part that I swab.
Okay. And then the pistol grip, is that the area?
Right. That's where your hand, your palm would be. So if the trigger's here, the pistol grip is where your hand is holding onto.
Okay.
I guess they don't train attorneys on the parts of a rifle very well. Maybe he's just asking the questions just so that he can get the answers out to the jury, but, doesn't come off too well.
So when the DNA swab is done initially, obviously you're looking for potentially forensic evidence on that gun, right?
Correct.
But you don't know the areas specifically that you're supposed to be looking at, true?
Unless I'm otherwise told, when I process, whether it's a gun or a rifle, it's going to be typically the same areas that I would obtain swabs from. If there was something else for some other reason or rationale that I would have to do things differently, then I would do things differently.
It also makes no sense. Why don't you swab the barrel anyway? If a person gets shot at close range, there might be forensic evidence on the barrel.
Normally, to swab a rifle or a handgun, just about all our evidence people would choose the same areas.
Okay, and I'm not questioning that. What I'm asking is, at some point, do you learn more information about this case?
I'm sorry, as far as...
I'll ask it to you this way. Did any detective come to you and ask you to do additional swabs on that firearm now that more information about what had happened was out there?
No, they did not.
That's horrible. So they learn that the issue about Joseph Rosenbaum maybe lunging for Kyle's rifle was important, but they never went to him and said, hey, you need to swab the barrel because he might have grabbed a hold of it. Now, keep in mind, you might be saying, well, this is terrible on the Kenosha Police Department. It's also terrible on Clair Binger. He's part of the law enforcement agency in Kenosha. He works with the police department. They are one and the same. So why didn't he ask the police department to swab the barrel?
If somebody would have asked you to swab based on information they had, and they said to you, Officer Van, we would like to know if there's DNA on the actual barrel of that gun. Could you have done that?
Absolutely.
And that wasn't done, was it?
No.
That's just sinks the entire prosecution's argument here. Not only do they not have evidence that could incriminate Kyle, they didn't even request it. Oh, by the way, it gets now juicy. Keep in mind that the prosecution has been exposed here. They should have had the barrel examined for DNA. If they couldn't find any, that would reinforce their argument that Joseph Rosenbaum never got a hold of the rifle. Now remember, the burden of proof is on them, not the defense. Now listen to the prosecution's response.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
Are you aware if the defense attorneys asked for further testing of the gun?
I was not informed of any other further testing.
Thank you.
Are you crazy? What the hell kind of save is this? You're asking, did the defense ask you to swab the barrel? Of course they didn't. The burden of proof is on you, not them. Why would they? If they requested that the barrel be examined for DNA and nothing comes back, then that strengthens the prosecution's argument that Joseph Rosenbaum never got a hold of the rifle. Why would they take that chance? Remember, if they do the analysis, it has to be entered into discovery. So the burden of proof is on you. I mean, I can't believe this. We're going to switch over here to a scientist. Her last name is Rasmussen, but I don't recall what her first name is. However, she's really credible. She seems to know what she's doing. There's nothing wrong with her background or her testimony. She's honest. She's fairly sharp. And she's not going to do Thomas Clair Binger a lick of good. Let's listen in.
Did you find any DNA on any of those swabs?
Yes.
Where did you find DNA?
There was DNA detected on all 5 of those evidentiary items.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
And what did you do once DNA was detected?
I attempted to develop a profile from each of those and then attempted to interpret those profiles and make any comparisons to those.
Now, for the trigger swab, was there any DNA found from the trigger swab?
Yes.
And who was the source of that DNA?
A single source male profile was obtained from the swabs from the trigger, and Kyle Rittenhouse is the source of that DNA profile.
Means Kyle Rittenhouse pulled the trigger that night. Man, shocking revelation.
Now, the next finding is swabs from the barrel guard. Is that a part of a gun?
Yes.
And what were the findings on the barrel guard?
The barrel guard contained a mixture of DNA, so there was DNA present from at least 2 people. This contained DNA from at least 1 male. And assuming that there were 2 people present, I was able to do a comparison to each of the 3 different individuals in this case. Would you like me to read those results as well? For the barrel guard, this was a 2-person mixture, and assuming there are 2 people present, we compared 2 different hypotheses or propositions or explanations for the data. The first explanation is that this DNA profile came from the person of interest in an unknown individual, and the second is it came from 2 unknown individuals. So in this case, there were 3 different persons of interest, which were each compared separately to that mixture profile. There was strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 70,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture from 2 unknown individuals than it is a mixture resulting from Joseph Rosenbaum and an unknown individual.
In other words, Joseph Rosenbaum almost certainly did not grab a hold of the barrel guard. What about the barrel? I wonder when she's going to get to that.
There is very strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber in this mixture. It is at least 2 billion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals than Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual.
Anthony Huber probably didn't get a hold of the barrel guard either, but nobody claimed he did. It's the barrel. What about the barrel?
And there is very strong support for inclusion For Kyle H. Rittenhouse, it is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals.
So Kyle evidently grabbed a hold of the barrel guard on his own gun. Wow.
So am I understanding that there's strong support to exclude Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber on that DNA analysis, but very strong support to include Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
That was a good move. He basically clarified it for the jury because all through that rattling, it was kind of hard to figure out what she was saying, but okay.
Is it fair to say that's essentially the same findings as the swabs from the barrel guard, but the numbers and the likelihoods are different?
They are similar conclusions, yes.
Now, the next item is the magazine swabs. What were your findings from the magazine swabs?
We're going to find out now. If Joseph Rosenbaum or Anthony Huber got a hold of Kyle's rifle and switched magazines on him, that would be pretty tricky.
There were 2 sets of magazine swabs submitted in this case. The first set was a low-level 2-person mixture that contained DNA from at least 1 male. And this was also interpreted with star mix.
And what were the results?
There is moderate support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 2,670 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture from 2 unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. The conclusion was uninformative for Anthony M. Huber. The statistical value generated for his comparison has been seen for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known not to be included. So our laboratory will not make a conclusion in this statistical range. There is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals.
Well, there goes the defense's case that Joseph Rosenbaum or Anthony Huber were swapping out the magazines on Kyle's gun, but it sure looks like Kyle may have switched magazines on his rifle from time to time.
Now, so in terms of Mr. Huber, you cannot either exclude or include him.
Correct. The amount of DNA present from the second contributor, and this is a low-level mixture, there was less information present, so we are less able to make a definitive answer one way or another.
Uh-oh, so maybe Joseph Rosenbaum did switch magazines on Kyle's rifle.
Now, the last item here is the second set of magazine swabs. What were the findings there?
Oh, well, maybe they switched the other magazines, not the first one. We'll have to check this thing out. No, we won't. We're going to move forward. Everybody knows that it doesn't matter what kind of DNA they found on the magazines or the pistol grip or the trigger or the barrel guard. We want to know, what about the barrel?
And is it more or less likely to transfer DNA in a touch DNA situation than, say, if bleeding onto an item?
Body fluids are a definite source and good source of DNA. Touch DNA will vary greatly in the amount of DNA contained in the resulting sample. It will vary based on how long the object was handled, how much friction or pressure was involved, how recently that individual had washed their hands, if they had touched their face prior to touching the item. There are quite a number of factors. So touch DNA has much more variance in the quality of DNA obtained.
So, assuming your hand is not bleeding or doesn't have any sort of other bodily fluid on it, what kind of cells would you be expecting to find if it's touch DNA? Like from where in the body or what fluids in the body?
Touch DNA is often from skin cells or transferred from, as I said, usually touching your face is the most likely source of DNA, or touching any other items may also be a secondary transfer of DNA.
So if I touch this television here briefly, I may or may not leave DNA behind on it.
You probably left DNA behind. Whether it was enough to be detectable via our methods is a different question.
You've already lost the argument. You didn't swab the barrel, so why are we going through this? Under what conditions could we have left DNA on the rifle? It doesn't matter now, because you didn't swab the barrel anyway. So what's the point of this?
But if I sat here and touched it for a longer period of time, or if my hands were particularly sweaty, would it be fair to say that it'd be more likely there'd be enough DNA to test?
Yes.
Now, we in the courtroom have seen a video that.
And by the way, he's strengthening the defense's argument there. He's basically saying that if Joseph Rosenbaum only touched the barrel very briefly, he would have not likely left DNA on the rifle. But why are you introducing that argument? That's the defense's argument. But of course, at this point, it doesn't even matter because you didn't swab the barrel.
Shows Mr. Huber making contact with the firearm that was in question here. How could it be that Mr. Huber makes contact with the firearm and does not leave DNA behind?
As far as leaving DNA behind or being detected on the samples we received, touch DNA, again, can vary. There may have been very little DNA on his hands when he handled that object. It may have been wiped away later. The sample may have been exposed to heat or moisture or undergone a duration of time before it was collected, and all of those things will limit the amount of DNA that can be detected.
Really good move there, Mr. Prosecutor. They didn't find Anthony Huber's DNA on the barrel guard. That would be a very small, minor point in your favor. And what did you do? You turned around and destroyed it by getting her to admit that doesn't mean anything. He still could have touched it. Whose side are you working on? The prosecution or the defense?
Is it true? Let me ask it this way. Does your lab have restrictions on what they will accept in terms of items for simply touch DNA analysis?
Yes.
And why is that, to the best of your knowledge?
We have submission guidelines for touch DNA items. They are less likely to result in usable DNA profiles, and we will not accept touch DNA items on nonviolent cases.
I hope that a rifle barrel is one of those items. Otherwise, I have no idea why you even bothered to ask this question.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-exam.
And once again, the defense is like, okay, he pretty well wiped out his own argument. Do you have anything on your legal pad that we could ask? No, pretty well have taken care of all of it. So they're going to have to come up with something. And actually, Sharophacy does a pretty good job.
When you get a sample to be tested, who tells you what area, in this case, so there's a firearm, right? You test it.
The DNA unit did not receive the firearm itself in this case.
What did you?
They didn't even get the firearm. They just got a bunch of Q-tips. But we already knew that. But he's just reinforcing that to the jury. Some of them might be under the impression that she pulled out this firearm and was doing testing on it. No.
You received?
We received swabs that were collected from a firearm.
Okay. And so when law enforcement sends those to you, they tell you this swab was taken from this area of the firearm or this area of the firearm, and we'd like you to test it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that you never got a swab from the barrel of that gun?
The barrel guard was the closest, to my knowledge, that was obtained from the barrel of the gun.
Do you know what?
She's a little uncomfortable. She is the prosecution's witness, but keep in mind, her job is to get up there and tell the truth, not to defend the prosecutor.
A barrel guard is?
I do not.
Okay.
So she doesn't really know guns very well, but that's okay. She's not meant to. She gets key tips. She analyzes. She's not required to be a gun expert. She has caught some flack for this. It's undeserved.
Agree, however, it's listed barrel guard. There's nothing on here listing barrel of gun.
Correct.
Okay. So
look at Binger. He's like, oh, man. They caught us.
if, for example, Joseph Rosenbaum touched the barrel of that gun, we'll never know that, right?
I have no way of determining it.
Because it wasn't sent to you for analysis, right?
Yes.
Look at Binger. Your entire argument has just been destroyed, and you did it to yourself. The look of disgust.
Now,
Is this your future going down the drain? Yeah.
Mr. Rasmussen, I'm going to show you what has been marked exhibits 45 and 46 for identification. I just would like if you can tell me what you see in those exhibits.
In Exhibit 45, I see a person walking the opposite direction of whoever's taking the photo, and a person on the ground, and there's an object connecting them. The person on the ground appears to be holding on to the object.
A rifle.
Okay. Jim, can you tell me if you okay? No disagreement that the person on the ground is Mr. Rittenhouse? No disagreement that the person standing up is Mr. Huber? No disagreement. No disagreement that the object in between them is a firearm? No disagreement. Okay. So, Mr. Rasmussen, if I told you that person standing there is Anthony Huber, okay, that we agree on that, you agree that it appears Anthony Huber is touching that, and we agree that's a gun. You'd agree that Anthony Huber is touching that gun, right? It appears to be he's touching that gun?
It appears to be.
Okay. Now, in the areas, so the fact there's no DNA present in the areas you were asked to look at doesn't mean that the person didn't actually touch the firearm and see it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The DNA, yeah, correct.
Okay. Can you do the other one, please?
So basically, Anthony Huber is clearly touching the gun, but you never found his DNA on the gun. How do you explain that? Well, the answer is easy. They never swabbed the barrel. That's where Anthony Huber was grabbing hold of the thing.
So if I told you that's a different angle, that's Mr. Rittenhouse on the ground, that's Mr. Huber holding the skateboard, and that's a firearm, you'd agree it appears that Mr. Huber is touching that firearm. Do you agree with that?
That appears to be the case.
Okay. And so the fact that, I don't know where that is on the gun, but the fact that the DNA isn't there, you know, everybody thinks DNA is this thing that proves everything. You'd agree that we can see he's actually touching the firearm.
What is your question?
Well, the fact that it's not present, and I don't know where on the gun that is, but the fact that DNA is not present in any of the areas of the firearm for Mr. Huber doesn't mean that he didn't actually touch it.
Correct. Whether DNA was detected from an individual or not does not mean that they did not touch that item.
Yeah, he had her cornered there. We all agree that Anthony Huber is touching the rifle, but you didn't find DNA on it. The fact that you didn't find DNA does not mean that he did not touch the rifle. She has to admit to that, which was the truth.
And I think you said, and tell me if I have this right, the shorter amount of time someone touches something, the less likely there'll be DNA which you can compare or find.
Yes, the less an item is handled, the less I would expect there to be an opportunity for DNA to transfer.
Does the question sound familiar? It should. The prosecution asked it earlier. Why? Only they know.
Was there ever a follow-up request by law enforcement to test any other areas of that gun?
Not to my knowledge. That may not have gone directly to me, though it may have been to someone else at the crime laboratory.
So in other words, the prosecution, also known as law enforcement, never asked to have the barrel swabbed. So what did we prove? Well, we spent a whole lot of taxpayer money to swab a rifle, but not the real parts that we were interested in, sending the swabs to the state, having a report generated, having these people take times out of their day, of course they're being paid by the state to do it, and getting up on the stand and providing absolutely nothing to implicate Kyle Rittenhouse. There was no point in swabbing that rifle and getting everybody all excited about DNA results if you're not going to swab that part of the rifle that's important. This was embarrassing. The jurors had to be looking at each other like, wait a minute, we sat through this crap, listened to the prosecution, put their witnesses up on the stands, and then totally gut their own arguments. What was all this about? Well, it's Clair Binger. The guy's not bright, and he botched this one badly. Like my video, subscribe to my channel. and I have more Binger boneheaded moments coming. I got lots more.